Like, why wouldn't they want to use all their soldiers? I don't understand why they wanted this to be like a white guy only type thing.
Well, you have to look at it their perspective. Imagine if there's like Indian or non-white British troops firing upon white Boers. Like, just like think of the international outrage there would be
I
that
mean,
they're using
it's still British forces though.
colored soldiers to fight their fellow white men.
Because it was a different time, man. All I'm
It was a
thinking about
different
is
time.
winning.
It was a different era.
Yeah.
An
Yeah.
era that people were much more racist. So, I mean, it was just it. The narrative would have been the narrative would have quickly, um, been like, look at what the British are doing. I mean, a similar narrative went around with France during the First World War, when the French started using their black troops from Africa to fight the Germans.
What, that they thought that, people were like, oh my God, look,
That they were like
France is
betraying
using all
their
the black
race.
people,
They were
to kill
betraying
white people.
they were betraying their race.
That's some racist bullshit.
Well, yeah, but this is this is 1899.
Yeah, I know. It's just hard for me to put myself in those shoes,
I mean,
It's like, the way I think of it is like, tactically speaking, if you want to lose the war, go ahead. Just make it a white man's war then. Just handicap yourself on purpose. Go for it.
they didn't.
Tactically stupid.
There was
Forget about the
obvious
racism.
reasons why they did not use colored soldiers, and it was one of the primary reason was not to cause an international stir, but also just not. They didn't want to. They wanted to prevent a racial war from breaking out afterwards.
I mean, it
Because
makes more
what if,
sense to
like,
me
they
from the
recruited
Boer
black
perspective.
soldiers and then white soldiers were fighting them from the Boers, and then they had this harbored resentment that like it could have caused all sorts of like big racial problems in the colonies afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, it makes more sense to me from the Boer perspective because, both sides wanted, warned the different tribes to stay out of the war. And like, you don't really want to start arming a bunch of these tribes who might, after the war, turn those guns upon you, right? So it makes sense for me for why the Boers wouldn't want to use colored or black forces or different tribal forces, non-white forces. But it doesn't really make a ton of sense for me on the British perspective. It just seems like a unnecessary handicap, even despite the what you put out for the they don't want to cause an international stir, being race traitors or whatever it is.
Well, you have to remember that people back in this day thought white people were better than brown people.
Yeah.
so I'll just there's no like easier way to say it. Like, that was just the attitude among most people.
Yep.
So if you have it wouldn't have sat right. It wouldn't have been kosher, as they say, in the press, or just for even the morale of like British soldiers who are fighting with black soldiers against like white people. There's lots of ways that you can think of it. So they preferred to just keep it because it was already there was already lots of racial problems in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
In every colony, including both the Dutch Boer colonies and the British colonies. They're already like a lot of problems with how stratified the societies were. They didn't want to add fuel to the fire because in that part of the world, race wars were breaking out frequently, and not just between whites and blacks, but between like blacks and other black tribes. Like, it was just kind of a mess. It was one of the reasons why the British had so many problems there. So they just, in their mind, this was like a way to just keep the war clean, just have like a classic kind of set piece war. And with that, and that was and you're right, that attitude they brought initially led to some pretty serious losses in the beginning of the war.
Mm-hmm.
As we proceed. But what they ended up doing really is that they ended up filling a lot of those reserve seats like a lot of people who fought the war on the British side were Canadians, Australians, and New Zealanders. So
Right.
they ended up going over and I think at least 25,000 white soldiers from the white colonies served.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I
And
burped.
yeah, no sweat. Um, yeah, I mean that's interesting that they brought in so many people from all over the world when they could have just been bringing them in from more locally. But that's neither here nor there. I think the Boers knew though that they couldn't win like a protracted war against the British Empire, and their best hope was to win early enough victories and force Britain to like go to the negotiating table as it did before. And the Boers had somewhere between like about 40,000 men, while the British forces in South Africa were about 27,000. So the Boers already had that numbers advantage, and also the British forces were spread out across various garrisons too, so they weren't all in the same spot either. And these early days would be like the only time that the Boers would have to have that numerical advantage before they start getting reinforcements and resupplies. So naturally, the smart move was to strike first, and that's what they did. And at the beginning of the war, the Boers launched a series of these coordinated offensives into the British controlled territory. The main part of the Boer offensive was directed at the Natal and the Cape colonies, where they hoped to basically just overrun the British garrisons before those reinforcements could arrive from the sea. Now, in Natal, the Boers crossed over the border in mid-October, and they were going after the British garrison at Ladysmith, and the British commander in Natal, General Sir George White. He was basically caught totally off guard, with his pants down. And within a couple of days, the British forces were in full retreat out of that area, and it cut off a large portion of the British army because that was a huge area. And in to the west of there, in the Orange Free State, they moved into the Cape Colony, and primarily they were going to go after the diamond mining center of Kimberley. And then they had basically set up a siege. So that was also mid October 1899. The Boer forces laid siege to Kimberley, and inside there were about 40,000 civilians in a small British garrison. They basically trapped them. And the most important of those three towns that we've just talked about so far was Ladysmith, and that one it held the most, like the majority of the British forces that were in Natal. At the end of October, the Boer forces surrounded that town. They cut off the communication lines with the outside world. There were about 12,000 British troops that got trapped there, and the relief columns got repeatedly defeated in their attempts to break the siege. So they kept getting spanked as they try to, unblockade the town. And this was some pretty early wins for the Boers.
Yeah, and what happens is that so by the winter, by December in 1899, the British war effort was in total crisis. The Boers they had they effectively had sieges on all the major British cities in South Africa, and things got a lot worse. So what is known as Black Week? So Black Week was a string of like high casualty events, high casualty losses for the British, and they all happened in a span of 5 days. So between December 10th and December 15th, 1899, and it ends up being probably the worst setback of the British military in the 19th century. And it was just like a stunning to the British public. Like even Queen Victoria, who was normally stoic, was freaking out about it. And the way these battles play out, like they're all just kind of they're all just like these fuck ups that like seem that they could have been avoided. Like they're all like these. You look at them now when you read